Emily Carter had always lived a quiet life. After moving to a new apartment in Seattle, she hoped for peace, a place to start over after a difficult breakup and months of loneliness. Her job as a freelance designer kept her glued to her laptop, her days melting together in silence. She had neighbors, yes, but she didn't really know them. Except one Daniel Brooks, the man who lived next door. Daniel was the kind of neighbor everyone liked but never really got close to. He was polite, calm, and respectful, the sort of person who always held the elevator door open and said good morning with a genuine smile. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with dark hair, an easy voice, and the kind of steady presence that made people feel safe. Emily didn't know much about him beyond that he worked in architecture and spent most weekends away hiking or kayaking. He seemed content in his own quiet world. Their connection began with small gestures. A smile in the hallway. A short chat about the weather. Nothing special, but something about him always caught her attention. Maybe it was the way he seemed grounded, or maybe it was how his kindness felt unforced. One afternoon, Emily came home from the grocery store to see Daniel struggling to lift 2 heavy boxes from his car. Without thinking, she set her bags down and walked over. "Hey, do you need a hand?" she asked. He looked surprised, then smiled. "Actually, yes, that would be great." Together they carried the boxers filled with books and tools up to his apartment. It took only a few minutes, but the simple act broke the invisible wall between them. When they finished, he offered her a glass of water, and they talked for the first time, really talked. About the building, about work-from-home boredom, about Seattle's endless rain. From that day on, things felt different. They greeted each other more often, sometimes stopped to chat a little longer. It wasn't flirtation. It was something gentler, like to people quietly discovering a rhythm they didn't know they shared. Then, one Friday evening, came the moment that changed everything. Emily had just settled on her couch when she heard a knock. It was Daniel. He stood at her door holding a small paper bag and a hesitant smile. I made too much pasta," he said, looking slightly embarrassed. "Would you like some?" She laughed softly and took it, touched by the simple gesture. "Thank you. That's really nice of you." He nodded, as if unsure whether to leave or say more. After a pause, he cleared his throat. "Actually," he began, "I wanted to ask you something." Emily tilted her head. "Sure, I'm going to Lake Tahoe next week," he said. "It's just a short vacation. I rented a cabin by the lake, quiet, peaceful. My friend who was supposed to come along canceled last minute. So I was wondering if you'd like to join. There's plenty of space." The words caught her off guard. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard him. "You're inviting me." He nodded, his smile small but sincere. "Yeah, you mentioned you've been working nonstop. I thought maybe you could use a break." Emily hesitated. It wasn't something she'd normally say yes to, traveling with someone she barely knew. Yet there was something about Daniel that didn't feel risky. He wasn't pushy, wasn't trying too hard, just honest. And truthfully, she had been feeling trapped lately. Her apartment, her laptop, her thoughts. A few days away sounded like a breath of air she didn't realize she'd been craving. Still, she wasn't impulsive. She crossed her arms, half smiling. "Are you sure you're okay traveling with your neighbor? What if I snore?" Daniel laughed lightly. "Then I'll bring earplugs." Its easy humor made her relax. Against her better judgment, she said, "Okay, why not?" "Really?" he asked, his eyes lighting up. "Yeah," she said. "I could use a change of view." When he left, Emily closed the door and leaned against it, her heart beating faster than usual. What had she just agreed to? A trip with her neighbor, someone she barely knew beyond casual hallway conversations. It sounded spontaneous, out of character, maybe even a little foolish. Yet deep down, it didn't feel wrong. It felt like the start of something unexpected. Over the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She packed carefully, unsure what kind of clothes to take. Every time she ran into Daniel in the hallway, there was a new kind of warmth in there, smiles, like a quiet understanding that something had shifted between them. On the morning of the trip, Daniel knocked on her door, suitcase in hand. He looked effortlessly calm, dressed casually in jeans and a gray jacket. Emily, on the other hand, felt her nerves jump. "Ready?" he asked with a grin. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, locking her door. The drive started in silence. The city faded behind them, replaced by winding roads, tall trees, and the occasional soft hum of music from the car radio. Daniel wasn't overly talkative, but he had a way of making small talk feel comfortable. They spoke about music, favorite movies, the best coffee in Seattle. He asked about her work, listened carefully, and shared stories from his architecture projects about how he loved designing spaces that made people feel at ease. Somewhere along the highway, Emily found herself laughing freely, realizing she hadn't done that in a long time. Daniel noticed and smiled. "You should laugh more often," he said. "It suits you." His words lingered longer than they should have. As the day stretched on, the drive began to feel less like a trip with a neighbor and more like a quiet escape from everything familiar. Emily watched the scenery pass by the snow-tipped mountains, the clear blue sky, and felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. By the time they reached Lake Tahoe, evening had begun to fall. The air was crisp, the lake shimmered beneath the fading sunlight, and pine trees lined the shore like a painting. Their cabin stood close to the water, simple but cozy, with a porch facing the lake. When Daniel unlocked the door and let her in, she couldn't help but smile. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Yeah," he said softly. "I thought you'd like it." That first night, after unpacking and making dinner together, they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, sipping tea as the stars appeared one by one. The silence wasn't awkward, it felt peaceful, natural. For the first time in months, Emily's mind wasn't racing. Daniel looked out at the water, his expression thoughtful. "I don't usually invite people on trips," he said quietly. "But when my friend canceled, you came to mind. I guess it just felt right." Emily turned to him, unsure how to respond. She wanted to ask why her, but she didn't. She simply said, "I'm glad you did." A gentle smile crossed his face. "Me too." As the night grew colder, Emily felt something inside her shift. It wasn't romance, not yet, just a sense that this moment, this trip, was about to mean more than she expected. She couldn't explain it, but she could feel it. When she finally went to bed that night, listening to the quiet rustle of the wind outside the cabin, she felt lighter. Something new was beginning, something she didn't see coming but couldn't ignore. And as she closed her eyes, one thought echoed softly in her mind. Sometimes the most unexpected invitations lead to the most unforgettable stories. You said, the first morning at Lake Tahoe felt like stepping into another world. The air was colder than Emily expected, the kind that made her cheeks sting a little, but it felt clean fresh. When she stepped outside, the lake stretched before her like a mirror, reflecting the pale blue sky. Daniel was already up, sitting on the porch steps with a mug of coffee in his hands. "Morning," he said with a smile. "I made coffee. It's strong, but it works." Emily took the mug he offered, their fingers brushing for a second. It shouldn't have meant anything, but for some reason, her heart skipped a beat. They sat quietly, watching the sun rise above the mountains. And for the first time in a long while, Emily felt completely at peace. After breakfast, they decided to explore the nearby trails. Daniel led the way, pointing out old pine trees and frozen creeks. He told her about how he used to camp a lot as a kid, how he liked the feeling of being away from everything. Emily listened, smiling at how his voice carried warmth even in the cold air. They walked for hours, talking about small things, her work, his favorite books, the kind of quiet dreams people don't usually say aloud. It was easy being around him. There was no pressure to impress, no noise to fill the silence. Just the soft crunch of snow under their boots and the wind moving through the trees. By afternoon, clouds started gathering and the light dimmed. "Looks like rain," Daniel said, glancing at the sky. They decided to head back before it got worse. The first drops began to fall just as they reached the cabin. The rain came fast, turning into a heavy storm. Wind shook the trees outside, thunder rolled over the lake, and lightning flickered in the distance. Inside, the air grew cool, and Daniel lit the fireplace. The flames cast a golden glow on the wooden walls, filling the room with warmth and quiet. Emily sat by the window, watching the storm, while Daniel brought 2 cups of hot cocoa. "Looks like we're stuck here for a while," he said, settling into the chair beside her. She smiled. "Could be worse." Its power flickered once, then again, and finally went out. Darkness filled the cabin, except for the flickering fire. Emily laughed softly. "Well, that's perfect timing." Daniel grinned. "Good thing we have firelight and no work emails." The storm outside seemed to push them closer together. They talked for hours, voices low as if afraid to disturb the stillness of the night. Daniel told her how he'd left a big firm in San Francisco because he was tired of chasing things that didn't make him happy. Emily admitted she often felt like she was drifting, doing everything she was supposed to do, but never really living. "I guess I just wanted something to feel real again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I get that. Maybe that's why I came here, to remember how it feels to just be." A gust of wind hit the windows, and Emily shivered. Daniel got up and placed another log in the fire. The orange glow lit his face, softening his features. When he sat back down, their eyes met in the dim light. Something unspoken passed between them, something fragile, yet deeply human. "Do you ever think," he said quietly, "that maybe we meet certain people just when we're supposed to?" Emily nodded slowly. "Yeah, like it's not random." He smiled faintly, but didn't say anything more. The fire crackled, and the rain kept falling, steady and endless. Emily found herself studying the way the light flickered across his face. How calm he seemed, even as the storm raged outside. Hours passed without them noticing. They shared small stories from their past, some funny, some bittersweet. Daniel told her about losing his mother when he was young, how he used to draw buildings just to feel closer to her because she loved art. Emily listened quietly, feeling the weight of his words. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He shrugged gently. "It's okay. It taught me to appreciate moments like this." Her heart tightened at that. She'd met many people, but few who spoke like that, with honesty instead of drama. As the night deepened, the storm slowly began to calm. The thunder grew distant, the rain softened to a whisper. Emily wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and Daniel offered another one without a word. The firelight made the room glow with a gentle warmth that felt almost alive. There was a pause in their conversation, a silence that felt full rather than empty. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice low. "You know, I didn't invite you here just because of the extra cabin." Emily's eyes lifted to his. "No." He shook his head slightly. "I guess I noticed you seemed tired, like you needed space to breathe." "Maybe I did too." She didn't know what to say. The honesty in his tone caught her off guard. He wasn't flirting. He was just being real. And that made her heart stir in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you," she said finally, "for asking me to come. I almost said no. I'm glad you didn't." They both smiled, small, genuine smiles that said more than words could. The clock ticked softly. The only sounds were the rain and the fire. Emily leaned her head back against the couch, her eyes growing heavy. She didn't realize she was drifting off until she felt the faint brush of a blanket being placed over her. She opened her eyes just enough to see Daniel moving quietly, making sure she was warm. He didn't say anything, just smiled when he saw her half awake. "Get some rest," he whispered. She nodded drowsily and closed her eyes again, her mind floating somewhere between sleep and thought. For once, she wasn't worrying about work, the future, or being alone. She felt safe. When she woke up later, the storm had passed. The fire had burned low, and Daniel was asleep on the armchair across the room. His head rested back, his face calm in the faint light. Emily sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She looked at him quietly, realizing that this trip, this moment, was something she hadn't expected. She'd come here thinking it would just be a getaway. But it was becoming something else entirely. Maybe it wasn't about the lake or the quiet or the storm. Maybe it was about finding connection again, something real, something simple. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The world was quiet, the sky beginning to clear. Emily stood by the window, watching the clouds drift away and the stars reappear one by one. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a change she couldn't explain, like the part of her that had been closed off for so long had started to open again. And as she looked back at Daniel sleeping peacefully by the fire, she knew that something between them had shifted to Dot, not in a loud or dramatic way, but softly. Like the sky after a storm when everything feels new again. Asterisk when Emily woke the next morning. Sunlight was streaming through the curtains. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside shining and clean. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, and for the first time in a long while, she felt rested. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she heard the soft sound of a kettle whistling and realized she was still at the cabin, still miles away from everything she'd left behind. She walked to the porch and saw Daniel sitting there, mug in hand, looking out over the lake. The water glittered under the sun like scattered glass. "Morning," he said, turning to her with that calm, easy smile that had started to feel familiar. "Coffee's ready. I thought you'd sleep longer." She took the cup he offered, their hands brushing again for just a second. The warmth of the cup spread through her fingers as she sat beside him. "I forgot what quiet mornings feel like," she said softly. He nodded. "That's why I come here. The world slows down a little." They sat together, listening to the soft rustle of wind through the trees. There wasn't much to say, everything felt peaceful. After a while, Daniel stood and stretched. "Want to go exploring? There's a short trail near the lake. Good view from the top." Emily smiled. "Lead the way." The morning passed quickly. They walked through the forest, sunlight filtering through the tall trees. The ground was still damp from the rain, but the air was crisp and alive. Daniel walked a few steps ahead, occasionally turning back to make sure she was keeping up. Every now and then he'd stop to point out something: a wildflower pushing through the dirt, a squirrel darting up a tree, a strange-shaped rock that looked like a heart. Emily laughed more than she had in months. It wasn't the loud, careless laughter of youth, but the soft kind that comes when you feel safe. Daniel's calmness was contagious. His presence had a way of quieting her racing thoughts. When they reached the top of the trail, the view opened wide. The lake stretched endlessly below, framed by mountains and sky. Emily stood still, taking it in. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Daniel looked at her instead of the view. "Yeah," he said quietly. They stayed there for a while, talking about small things, childhood memories, places they wanted to visit, dreams that had been put on hold. Emily told him she'd always wanted to paint landscapes, but never found the courage to start. Daniel encouraged her. "Maybe you just needed the right view," he said, smiling. They returned to the cabin around noon and made sandwiches for lunch. The mood was light, easy. Daniel teased her for putting too much mustard on hers, and she laughed, throwing a napkin at him. It was simple, ordinary, and yet it didn't feel ordinary at all. In the afternoon, they sat by the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the golden light of the sun. Daniel skipped stones, and Emily tried but failed miserably, laughing every time her stone sank. "You're hopeless," he said jokingly. "I'm a designer, not a stone thrower," she replied, laughing. He grinned. "Fair enough." There was a comfortable silence after that. Daniel looked out over the lake. "You know, I think we forget how to slow down," he said quietly. "We fill our days so much that we forget to feel them." Emily listened. His words stayed with her. She thought about her life, how it had become a routine of screens, deadlines, and empty evenings. She had been living, but not really living. Later, as the day began to fade, they decided to take the canoe out onto the water. Daniel rowed while Emily sat opposite him, her hand trailing lightly through the lake's cool surface. The world around them seemed to pause. No cars, no phones, no noise. Just the soft splash of oars and the fading colors of sunset. "This is perfect," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel looked at her across the boat, his eyes reflecting the orange sky. "It is," he agreed. "I can't remember the last time I felt this calm." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. It wasn't awkward, but it wasn't simple either. There was something new. There's something that had been quietly building since the storm. Emily looked away first, her heart unsteady. She wasn't sure what it meant or if she even wanted to define it. All she knew was that something about this man made her feel grounded, seen, and strangely hopeful. When they returned to the cabin, the light was fading. Daniel built a small fire outside, and they sat together, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars appear. The night was cool but clear, the lake reflecting every shimmer of light above. Daniel handed her a mug of hot chocolate. "For warmth," he said with a grin. She smiled, taking it. "Thank you. You think of everything I try." They talked softly, their voices blending with the sounds of the night, the crackle of the fire, the whisper of the breeze. Daniel shared stories from his childhood about growing up in Oregon, fishing trips with his father, the time he got lost in the woods and found his way back by following the sound of water. Emily listened, drawn to how he spoke, steady, thoughtful, with the kind of honesty that was rare. Then he asked, "What about you? What made you come to Seattle?" She hesitated, then told him about her breakup, how she'd wanted a new start but ended up isolating herself instead. "I thought moving would fix things," she said quietly. "But I just got busier. It's like I built a life that looked fine but didn't feel fine." Daniel didn't interrupt. When she finished, he said, "Maybe that's why you said yes to this trip." She looked at him. Maybe. The fire burned lower, and the stars thickened above them. The silence between them wasn't heavy, was full. It's like both of them were thinking the same thing but not ready to say it aloud. After a while, Daniel spoke again, his tone softer. "You know, it's strange how some people just fit into your life so easily. Like they were always meant to be there, you just hadn't met them yet." Emily felt her chest tighten. She didn't know what to say, so she just smiled faintly. "Yeah, I know what you mean." They didn't talk much after that. The night wrapped around them like a blanket, and the quiet was comfortable. Emily leaned back, her eyes tracing the stars, and for the first time in a long while, she felt connected to the world, to the moment, to him. When they finally went inside, the warmth of the cabin greeted them. Daniel turned off the lights, leaving only the faint glow from the fireplace. As she said goodnight, he paused for a moment, looking at her like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. "Sleep well, Emily," he said instead. "You too," she replied softly. Lying in bed later, Emily stared at the ceiling, her heart quietly full. This trip had started as a simple invitation, but it had become something deeper, something she didn't expect. She thought of Daniel's kindness, his steady presence, the way he listened without judgment. She realized that what she felt wasn't about excitement or attraction, it was about peace. The kind of peace that comes when you finally meet someone who reminds you what it feels like to be understood. And as the firelight flickered in the next room, Emily smiled to herself, knowing that something had changed inside her. Not loud or dramatic, but gently, like the calm after a storm. The last morning came too soon. Emily woke to the sound of birds outside and the faint smell of coffee drifting through the cabin. For a moment, she lay still, hoping the world could pause. That time might stretch just a little longer. But it didn't. The trip that had felt endless suddenly had an end. When she walked out to the porch, Daniel was already there, leaning against the railing, looking out at the lake one last time. The sunlight reflected off the water, soft and golden. "Morning," he said, turning toward her with a calm smile. "Sleep well." "Yeah," she said, though part of her wished she hadn't, so she could have stayed awake to remember every detail of the place. "I can't believe we're leaving today." "I know," he replied quietly. It went fast. They had breakfast in silence, both trying to act normal while pretending they weren't feeling what they were. There was a heaviness in the air that neither of them wanted to name. It wasn't sadness exactly, it was something deeper. A quiet awareness that something special was ending. After cleaning the cabin, they packed their bags. Emily took one last look around this small fireplace. The chair by the window, the blankets still carrying the faint scent of pine smoke. Every corner seemed to hold a memory from the past few days. Laughter, quiet talks, shared silence. When they stepped outside, the air felt different. The lake was calm again, the same as when they'd arrived, but she wasn't the same. The drive back to Seattle started slow. The roads curved through tall trees, sunlight flickering through branches. Daniel turned on the radio, soft music filling the car. Neither spoke much. There wasn't much to say that wouldn't sound small compared to what they just lived. After a while, Daniel glanced at her. "You're quiet," he said gently. She smiled faintly. "Just thinking. About—" She looked out the window, watching the scenery blur. "Everything. This place, this week." He didn't respond right away, but his hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Yeah," he said softly. "Me too." They stopped at a small roadside cafe for lunch. It was an old place with wooden benches and the smell of fresh pie. While waiting for their food, Emily caught herself studying him the way. He smiled when he spoke to the waitress. The way he stirred his coffee absent-mindedly. There was something steady about him, something safe. She wondered if he knew how much this trip had meant to her. How much lighter she felt now compared to the woman who had left Seattle only days ago. When they got back on the road, clouds began to gather again, painting the sky in shades of gray. Daniel drove quietly, the music low. Emily leaned her head against the window, watching the raindrops form and slide down the glass. The soft rhythm of the rain felt comforting. After a long stretch of silence, Daniel said, "You know, I didn't expect this trip to feel different. I've been here before, but this time it felt new." Emily turned to him. "Because of me?" she asked, half teasing, half serious. He glanced at her and smiled. "Yeah, because of you." Her heart fluttered, and she looked away quickly, hiding the small smile forming on her lips. "I'm glad I came," she said quietly. "It was good for me too." By the time they reached the city, the streets were busy again, full of noise and movement. The quiet world of the cabin felt far away, almost unreal. Emily felt a strange ache in her chest, the kind that comes when something meaningful ends before you're ready. Daniel parked the car in the apartment building's garage. Neither moved for a moment. The hum of the city outside felt too loud, too fast. Emily finally unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to him. "Thank you," she said, "for inviting me, for everything." He looked at her for a long second before replying. "You don't need to thank me. I'm the one who should thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me what quiet feels like," he said simply. They both smiled, soft and a little sad. Then he got out and helped her with her bag. As they walked up the hallway toward their apartments, Emily felt the weight of the moment pressing down. She didn't want to say goodbye. Not like this, not with polite smiles and quiet awkwardness. At her door, Daniel stopped. "So," he began, trying to sound casual, "I guess we're back." "Yeah," she said, her voice low. "Back to real life." He hesitated. "Emily." She looked up at him, waiting. "I don't want this to just fade away," he said. Whatever this was, it meant something. To me, her heart tightened. It meant something to me too. They stood there, close, but not touching, the quiet between them thick with everything unsaid. Finally, Daniel smiled a soft, uncertain smile that made her chest ache. "I'll see you around." "Yeah," she whispered. "See you around." He turned and walked to his door. She watched him go, her heart heavy and full all at once. When her own door closed behind her, the apartment felt too quiet. The city noises outside felt distant, almost unreal. For days after, life went on as usual. Work emails, laundry, grocery, runs. It all looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. Every time Emily passed Daniel in the hallway, their eyes met for just a second too long. Sometimes they exchanged a small smile. Sometimes just a quiet nod. But every time, her chest filled with that same warmth, the one that had started by the lake. One evening, after another long day at work, Emily stood by her window, watching the rain fall. The city lights blurred through the droplets, and for a moment she felt that same peace she'd found at the cabin. She thought of Daniel, his voice, his laughter, the way he'd looked at her across the firelight. She missed the calm of those days, but more than that, she missed the feeling of being seen. Just as she turned away, there was a knock at her door. Her heart skipped. When she opened it, Daniel was standing there, holding 2 travel mugs and wearing that familiar half smile. "I made too much coffee," he said softly. "Thought you might want some?" Emily blinked in surprise, then smiled. "Déjà vu," she said. He chuckled. "Guess it's becoming our thing." She took the mug, the warmth seeping into her fingers. "Thank you." For a moment, neither spoke. The hallway light flickered softly. There was something new in his eyes. Not uncertainty, but quiet hope. "Walk with me," he asked suddenly. "Just around the block. No cabins this time, I promise." Emily hesitated, but only for a second. "Let me grab my coat," she said with a smile. As they stepped outside, the rain had softened into a drizzle. They walked side by side through the glowing streets, not saying much, but feeling everything. It wasn't the quiet of the lake or the storm, but it was real, the kind of real that follows you home. Emily glanced at him, her heart calm and light. Maybe the trip had ended, but something else was just beginning. Something slower, gentler, and maybe even stronger. Sometimes life doesn't give you fireworks or grand endings. Sometimes it gives you a knock on the door, a warm cup of coffee, and the quiet start of something worth waiting for. And as they walked together through the rain, Emily realized that what had started as a simple vacation had become something she would never forget. A reminder that sometimes the best surprises come not from the places you visit, but from the people who walk beside you when you least expect it.